617 in Trinidad and Tobago as we look at the Monroe Road area of the highway with more vehicles heading south than heading north, but we're seeing a few more, hopefully staying within the speed limit. And we need to remind everybody, whether or not there's heavy traffic or not, or you're late or whatever, it is useful, it is necessary to stay within the speed limit for your own safety and the safety of others, and it is about exercising responsibility on the roads as well. But let's move back into studio because we want to get going with our discussion with the political leader of the movement for social justice, David Abdulah. Yesterday we heard from the former planning minister and member of parliament for Carina East, Dr. Boendra Tiwari, offering his own perspective on the political landscape heading into 2020 and the economic landscape. He painted a pretty bleak picture as far as the economy is concerned, and it could be argued quite legitimately that it was all with political intent as far as getting the PNM out of office whenever the general elections are called. What is the perspective of David Abdulah, politically or otherwise, socially, because his movement is called the Movement for Social Justice? He joins us now. Very good morning to you, David.
Morning.
Thanks very much for joining us. Good to have you with us. Is your political outlook dominated by the general election?
Well, morning, Faz. Morning to all of your viewers, listeners, and Happy New Year to you
and
all of the people here at TV6, and of course to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I think 2020, yes, the elections is the major political event on the calendar. But of course, as Lloyd Bess always people generally used to say that a week is a long time in politics.
Yes.
And Lloyd used to say there are many accidents that happen. So we don't know what are the political events that will take place between now and election date that could change the dynamics of the country. But certainly that is a major political event on our calendar. And from the cabinet reshuffle, the minor reshuffle that took place on Old Year's Day, it is very clear that the PNM is trying to maneuver itself with respect to its objectives for the election.
Explain what you mean by that, because we had Dr. Boendra Tiwari's take on it yesterday. And again, for those who might have missed it on Old Year's morning, Camille Robinson Redress is no longer planning minister. She is now social development minister. Sherry-Ann Critchlow Coburn has been removed from social development, is now a minister in the Ministry of Planning. The Prime Minister is now the planning minister, and Dr. Tiwari's take was that the appointment of the Prime Minister is not temporary, that this is how it's going to be until whenever the election is called. What is your take on these changes?
Yeah, well, first, I heard what Dr. Tiwari said with respect to the Prime Minister being also the Minister of Planning, and he was saying that was to approve a whole set of projects and things like that as the Planning Minister in the lead up to the elections. Let me just remind the country and remind Dr. Tiwari that in the teeth of the 2015 elections, he as Planning Minister approved projects in Chaguaramas, which went to a few people of the elites, the so-called 1%, to the disadvantage of people in this country. So, they both do it. But certainly, I think moving Mrs. Robinson Regis into social development is to try to get more of the social services distributed to people on the ground, because people have been saying that they're not getting government benefits and so on, whether it's dependent or not. I think that is clearly an election tactic. And moving Mr. Leonce into the Ministry of Works and Foster Cummings into rural development and local government, those are also moves to try to shore up areas where certain patronage, and I put up a post on Facebook that this was simply to deliver more patronage in order to win votes for the elections. And I think that basically is what it is. And somebody responded,
yes,
that is good politics. One person said that's good politics, and one said that's what parties, governments do all over the world. And the question is, yes, that might be true, but is that going to change the price of coffee after the elections? And the answer to that is no.
But that's the point, David Abdulah, that it is so transparent. I mean, obviously the PNM will say that it's about, they'll try to sweet soap it and so on. In the same way the UNC would have sweet soaped what they did prior to the 2015 election. And in a sort of indirect way, Dr. Tiwari acknowledged it to a certain degree, that same point that you just made, that they did exactly the same thing.
That's right.
And probably even worse in 2015, leading up to the election that was called on September the 7th. But it is so transparent. It is so blatant, yet still they know that they can get away with it because this is how the country operates.
Yeah, and I think I said to you after the local government elections, one of the things that has developed over the years with our politics and electoral politics in particular is that elections have become a commodity. So your vote becomes something that can be bought and sold for the right price.
Hasn't it always been thus?
I don't think it was always that way. I think the intervention of the ONR in 1981, where they introduced a lot of, that was the first time that you got big money in campaigns and razzmatazz and all kinds of things like that. And I think from then on, the culture of the politics changed. I mean, when I contested elections in 76, I mean, we run a shoestring budget, really literally a shoestring budget and so on. And people engaged in the campaign because of the love for the party, loyalty, whatever the issues were and so on, and not because of money. People didn't say they wanted to vote for you. You had to give them something, what you're running. Those issues didn't arise in 76. So the politics has changed.
It could be argued there was no money then at the time.
Well, 76 money was beginning to flow because the oil boom started in 73.
Right.
So money was beginning to flow in the country. Dr. Williams had already said money is no problem and that kind of thing. But the politics did change, I think, in 81. And you got a different culture creeping in, and it then, once you start, it started to gallop. So in that context, yes, PNM and UNC, if they're in government, they use government resources. Outside of government, they find other resources to try to get people to vote by offering not only promises, but gifts of one kind or the other, and benefits and patronage. And it's not just the ordinary man and the woman in the street who is unemployed, you know. It is also business people who get big contracts or promises of big contracts and so on. And it's part of the culture, too, of our economy, which is a rentier economy, where the government gets rents or the state gets rents from the hydrocarbon sector by way of taxes from the oil companies and gas companies and so on, and then is responsible for redistributing those rents to the rest of the country. And everybody then becomes dependent on those rents. So it's built into our economic structure as well.
And therefore, given the fact that the MSJ is still a fledgling organization, the results from the local government election on December the 2nd, as you yourself acknowledge, were not as encouraging as you would have hoped. What does that suggest for the MSJ moving forward politically into a general election year? Yeah,
and so we said, in the New Year's message that we issued, we said that this year we declared it the year of the revolution of the mind. By declaring it, of course, doesn't mean it's going to happen, but we are trying to signal to citizens that we need a revolution of the mind. And that, of course, is not going to happen overnight. It takes time. And also in our New Year's message, I quoted Angela Davis, who said that you have to every day seek to transform the world. You have to act to try and transform the world. Whether you are doing it, you're successfully doing it or not is not the point. You have to keep doing it because optimism is a political act. And so we continue with that sense of optimism that the work that we are doing is important political work, and it may very well have results in the 2020 general elections. It may not. And we are working, I don't want to say all that we're doing. We have a meeting this afternoon as the executive and next week Sunday as the activists and our candidates and so on, where we are mapping out our plans for the elections of 2020. But the work of transforming this country is an absolute necessity. Because look what happened on was it Olia's Day?
Yeah, the shootout.
On George Street.
Yes.
So yesterday, one of my people called me from Picton. One of our cousins was one of the people who was innocently shot, just happened to be walking by and got shot I think 5 times, and so on. So these are things, and the lady who
was killed, and because of that the taxi drivers have relocated.
That's right, and let me just express condolences. I mean, here's a lady who was just going about her business, going shopping.
Listra Hernandez-Patterson,
right.
And someone who's well known because she regularly
up and down,
commutes.
And going back to get transport to go home, gets killed. I mean, so we need to change this country.
But on what do you base optimism? Because you say you have to be optimistic. But optimistic on the basis of what, David Abdulah? Because the evidence is there. I mean, we had 550 murders in 2008.
Yeah.
We've gone 2 consecutive years with over 500 murders. And yes, there may be all sorts of different dynamics and so on. But essentially, where's the evidence to suggest that that revolution of the mind or even that discussion is taking place among the people who are likely or inclined to bring about real change in the way we govern our politics?
Yeah, it's there. There are signs that are there, and of course, how do you measure it quantitatively? Not necessarily by our election results.
Because people only see results. They say,
right.
as I'm sure. And in fact, I was in constant discussion with a colleague quite a few months ago, and they say, why you doesn't even have David Abdulah on the air? He's a political non-entity. They don't get no votes, but yet you still have him here all the time offering his views, which nobody takes on. And that is a narrative that people say, if you don't have the numbers, then you have no stake.
Right, and so that person is quite prepared to live with what they have, yes, and therefore will have to accept the outcome of whatever they support in terms of either PNM or
Clearly,
UNC.
many do, David Abdulah.
Right.
Many people,
yes.
sorry to keep badgering you.
Yes.
Many people, once you are PNM loyalists, there will always be a defense for the rubbish that goes on. When the People's Partnership in power, UNC in power, there will always be a defense. And I'm talking about defense not just on the ground. I'm talking about media people. I'm talking about business people. I'm talking about all the party hacks.
Yeah.
There will always be a defense.
Yes, but they don't constitute actually the majority of the country. Interestingly enough, I think they're about 20-25% loyal, diehard PNM, and similarly UNC. They actually don't constitute the majority of the population. Now, so a young man meets me while I was in a mall over the Christmas period. I don't know him. He said he was at the TEDx Port of Spain in September when I gave the talk about the Second Republic.
Right.
And he was very enthused by what I said and so on. So there are, and he wasn't the first who said that to me. So there are people who are thinking differently. Now, as in everything, it is how do you get enough of those people to decide to take the plunge to come out of their comfort zone by simply quietly saying to you, I support what you're doing, keep up what you're doing, and move to the point of breaking with the old culture and challenging the status quo. Because there's a lot of fear in this society as well. And the status quo is very deeply entrenched in so many ways, whether it is a professional who is now starting off and is worried about getting briefs or contracts or consultancies or whatever, or getting even a job, which employment is very limited these days. Whether it is a small business person who is struggling and so on, and whose supplier is one of the conglomerates, and if they run afoul of that conglomerate, then they get squeezed out of business. So at all levels of the society, there's a certain amount of fear, and the status quo uses that power to intimidate people. So we need to get, as what the Revolution in Mind says, we have to get people out of a moment of fear, because fear is a very powerful emotion, and transform that emotion of fear into an emotion where people are fed up, yes, but are prepared to make the break and to bring about change and to start the change.
6:30 in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's take a quick break and then we'll return to our discussion with David Abdulah. Much more on the table as far as the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. That transformation, is that ever going to take place? Do people even want it to take place? We'll be back right after this. 6:33 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, that celebratory tone from that old parandero, some people might have that same celebratory tone given the information we gave just a while ago about the top Iranian general being killed by the United States in Iraq, feeling, well, okay, happy days are here again, oil prices are going to shoot up, and maybe natural gas, which is our primary revenue earner in the energy sector, will go up as well. But David Abdulah, the leader of the MSJ, and someone very familiar with the energy environment from his long time with the OWTU, the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. What is your perspective on what happened overnight?
Yes, as you said, some people are going to feel very happy. The Minister of Finance is probably smiling from ear to ear, and the Minister of Energy, because oil prices have gone up and may stay up for a short while. We don't know how long. But that situation of that U.S. strike against the number 2 person in Iran, really, in terms of the power hierarchy, is going to signal much greater instability in the Middle East, which is generally just not good for the world. Because that will spawn more ISIS, more Al-Qaedas, and all of those responses to what is essentially Western imperial power and control, or attempt of power and control over energy resources. So that is not a good situation. And of course, it's clouded and in the ideology of anti-Islam and so on. And never forgetting what's happening in Israel. So Netanyahu is trying to remain onto power even though he's been charged with corruption and refusing to address the Palestinian issue in any serious way and so on. So that entire situation there is not good for the world. And Mr. Trump really is, as one person said, has lit a fuse, and he's really not sure where when and where the fuse will lead to an explosion, which he can't control. And
therefore, just on that point, you talk about the Second Republic and the revolution of the mind. How would you address those? And I know you've had to address it many times over. Someone like yourself with an ideology that would be labeled as anti-American, because we are in the shadow of the United States, that defends the Maduro regime, and therefore your effort in wherever that optimism is based is a non-starter in a landscape such as this.
Well, a pushback. So yes, when I say I'm anti-American, of course I'm not against the American people and so on. I've been consistent.
But you criticize American policies, you are labeled automatically as anti-American.
Oh, yeah. So American foreign policy, yes, I've been opposed to American foreign policy, because American foreign policy is really about the protection of U.S. corporate interests, what they define as their national security interests, based upon the Monroe Doctrine, which says that anything which is in the U.S. interest enables us to go into the Caribbean and Latin America and do whatever we need to do. So the Americans are all upset, or the Democrats at least are very upset about Russian interference in U.S. elections. But the U.S. interferes in everybody else's elections.
As part of their national policy.
That's right, and they don't bat an eyelid. So, I mean, I have absolutely no sympathy for them when they say that the Russians are interfering with their elections. When they're being interfering with everybody else's elections, they support some groups, but there is also major pushback against that kind of imperial power, if you wish.
I don't mean to interrupt you,
but Chile,
I know all those things that are happening. Yeah. But the point I was trying to get at is that...
How does it reflect on me?
Exactly, in the sense that how would you expect to gain traction with your call for a different thinking, a revolution of the mind, if we have been conditioned here in Trinidad and Tobago, and by extent the English-speaking Caribbean, former colonies of the British West Indies, to obey what we are told by the USA, by Britain, by the imperial powers. How do you, because people will be fearful. David Abdulah and the MSJ, we could be eaten, the Americans will alienate us, we go end up like Venezuela. So how can your movement ever take root in such a toxic environment?
Yeah, and the point is well taken. Now, 2 things about it. One is that, one of the powers of the colonial conquest was fear of not challenging those who control. And we must never be fearful to stand up for what is right and proper, whether it is saying to the powerful, and speak truth to power. There's nothing wrong about speaking truth to power. Now, it does not mean that an MSJ government would then engage in nationalization or appropriation of private assets. That's not what we're about. But we can say, as happened, for example, with CARICOM recently in the OAS. CARICOM had a resolution which passed in the OAS by majority vote against the violence that is now taking place in Bolivia. It was a very courageous step by CARICOM. So small states, as we did in the early 70s, entered into diplomatic relations with Cuba when the Cold War was very much on and so on. And we were the only 4 countries outside, I think, of Mexico that recognized Cuba in this whole hemisphere. So we spoke truth to power. So there's nothing wrong with standing up and speaking truth to power and calling a spade a spade. But that does not translate into policies which are going to work negatively in terms of how you manage the economy as an MSJ government, negatively in the interest of business. But I do think in the context of business, and I know you had the ECA reps on yesterday, that a lot of our business people here, not all, but a lot of them, have inculcated the American style of business as distinct from perhaps the Asian style and some of the European style of business, which was putting shareholders' interest, profit, above everybody else's interest. Now, sometime last year, there was a statement by major U.S. corporations and business leaders which said we have to revise that approach to corporate governance and put equally as the interest of the shareholder, the interest of employees and the wider communities. In other words, trying to change the business ethos. And a number of people have written about it. Noble Phillip wrote an important article in the Express about it and so on, letter to the editor. And I do think that we need to, therefore, as business, rethink it. So you have a situation where just before the New Year's, 2 major conglomerates in the country, Agostini and also Ansa Macal, sent home workers. Now, question that I pose is, did the top management and CEOs of those companies, did they take any cuts in their lifestyle and remuneration and so on? Why is it that only workers at the bottom end of the scale have to take the brunt of the burden of adjustment? Because when you do that, and that happens consistently in the country, and people see the elites living a particular lifestyle, while other people literally didn't have anything on the table for Christmas. And people were telling me that, even some of my own members are saying, we just didn't have anything for Christmas and so on. Then you get the type of situation where violence becomes completely out of hand and out of control.
Time has almost run out on us, David Abdulah. But just as a summation, because it's a very broad discussion.
It is.
But is it a broad discussion that really this is not the place and time heading into a general election? That people are basically saying, what is PNM going to give me? What is UNC going to give me? MSJ had nothing to give me. So essentially, this is the discussion.
And so we're trying to change that narrative and say it's not about what the PNM is going to give you or promise you or what the UNC is promising and so on. But what kind of society do we want to have in Trinidad and Tobago? That is really the fundamental question, you know. What kind of society? Do we want a society where we have a few who are humongously wealthy and powerful and rich, and a smaller number who are just making it and so on, and the majority struggling to keep their heads above water and drowning in economic circumstances and so on? Or do we want to have a society that is much more coherent? Do we want a society where there's violence like what we have or not? Do we want a society where there's equality of opportunity in terms of health and education, or do we not? What kind of society do we want in Trinidad and Tobago? And what the MSJ is saying is that is the fundamental question, because PNM or UNC not dealing with that, which is why we're saying that if one of those 2 wins, whichever one of those 2, assuming one of those 2 wins, after the 2020 general elections, we'd be no better off in this 3rd decade of the 21st century than we were in 2000, 2015, 2010, whatever. We're no better off.
David Abdulah, thanks very much for taking the time to join us early on this Friday morning. Yes, it is Friday. It might feel like a Tuesday because of the holiday in the middle of the week. It is Friday, so we mightn't have much of a Friday feeling with all of the serious issues on the table.
Monday when the traffic hits us.
Monday, exactly. Don't forget.
Back to reality.
Monday morning when school opens, then the reality will hit home that it is back to business in many ways. Thanks once again for joining us this morning. We'll take a break at 6:43 in Trinidad and Tobago, and we'll change our focus right after that break.